Yeah. Hi, I think I know basically everybody here. For anybody that doesn't know me online, I'm Caitlin McKinstry. I work for the native village of Eak, where I'm a biologist. We have a research farm in Sheep Bay that I'm going to talk more about in the afternoon. But first, right now, I'm going to talk about site selection. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, and I'll try to keep it quick so we can have some of our yummy enchiladas. I am going to show you where the current kelp farms are. I wish I had the information that we just got 5 minutes ago to add more to the map that I made, but for future maps, I'll try to add that. And then I'm just going to touch a little bit on the biology of kelp, just to orient you to the perspective of kelp, what they want, what they need, what they don't like. I have a background in oceanography, working here at the Science Center for 10 years, so I'm just going to go over real quick what's going on with the water column, what's in the water column that you should be aware of specifically for kelp. And then finally, I'll finish up with where the heck you grow it and how NVE selected their site. Right. So this is one of those great ADF&G map tools, and this is showing where all of the mariculture lease sites are in the Sound. So each one of those green little dots is a separate lease site. Some of those are oysters, quite a few of them are kelp. There are several sites that are in the works right now. There's one in Jack Bay that's being worked on by the Valdez Native Tribe. There's also several in near Newcheck in Port Chalmers that are going in as well, and those are all in the works right now. And if we zoom in on our side of the Sound, we have a bunch of these sites that you can see here. Just to start with some of the active oyster farms. So Simpson Bay Oyster Company is located here in Simpson Bay. The next oyster company is Safety Coast Shellfish. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to try any of those in town, but they are selling them in town. They're very good. And finally, the longest running oyster farm on our side of the Sound is Eagle Shellfish Company by Jim Aguiar, and he's been doing it since the 90s. He's a wealth of knowledge. So as far as active commercial kelp farms go, you can see the leases, but the only active farms that are actually growing kelp right now are Sky and Sean up at, Royal Ocean Kelp Farm with Taya and Kale, and then Sky and Sean's up here. Blue Green Enterprises just started this year. That's Native Conservancy and Dune Lankard's farm. And then next year, we will have Corey and Amber's farm with Wild Blue Mariculture. So that's kind of where they are. So going back just real quick, and I'll say it at the end too, if you really want to get into kelp farming, it might be worth skipping the whole permitting process and talking to these other owners that have their leases and have had their leases for several years, but for whatever reason, they just haven't decided to grow yet. So if you're super excited and stoked, maybe go over here and talk to the Mahonies. Ryan Schmidt's up here. Down here, there's Brett Bradford's site and Joe Arvidsson's site, so maybe they'd be interested in partnering with you. And over here in Sheep Bay, this is where our research farm is. And like I said, I'm going to talk about that in depth in the afternoon. So a little bit about biology. So my background is science, so you're not going to get away with your high school biology class today. I just wanted to go over kelp biology, plants versus kelp. So kelp aren't a plant. Plants are very complicated organisms. They're made up of a bunch of different types of cells. So here we have a super simple bean that you might see in science class. So this complicated structure has leaves right there to make photosynthesis. They don't really do anything else other than that for the plant. Down here you have the root system. The root system is responsible for getting all of the nutrients from the growth medium up to the rest of the plant. And then you have the shoot that is just acting as transporting stuff in between the leaves and down here to the roots. So the roots aren't photosynthesizing. They have to rely on the leaves. The leaves aren't doing anything to pull nutrients out of the ground. They have to rely on the roots. So things get complicated. There's specific cells. That's a plant. Kelp doesn't have that. There are no complicated systems. Basically, every single cell in the kelp's body can take care of itself. Kelp have these cool holdfasts. They kind of look like roots, but they're not taking up nutrients for the rest of the kelp body. They have these cool leaf-like structures called blades, and each one of those cells is right next to the growth medium. They're just taking up water and everything else for themselves. Same thing with the stipe. That's structural to hold up, in this case, a bull kelp, to hold that pneumaticist to the holdfast so the plant can be closer to sunlight to grow. So here for a plant, this is the growth medium. This is where all of the nutrients are coming from. So soil and soil quality is really important. So the analogy for kelp is the entire thing that is in, which is the ocean. So all of the ocean is the growth medium for kelp. So let's start thinking about what kind of things that those kelp like to grow in. Also, just like plants, kelp photosynthesize. So they need sunlight. They need carbon dioxide, which right now is a problem. There's too much of it in the water. And then, of course, they need water, which they're already in. So they don't have to worry about that. So through photosynthesis, they produce sugar and oxygen, which is really important, especially when you look at the ecological benefits of kelp. So that sugar is used for the plant to grow and reproduce and be happy. And just like all other plants, especially in your garden, they need the exact same chemicals and molecules that your garden needs. So specifically, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, carbon, iron is a key micronutrient for these guys. We're not too worried about carbon because there's just too much in the oceans right now contributing to ocean acidification. There's a lot in our area. We're not too worried about phosphorus, but we are going to take a minute to talk about nitrogen because that's one of the biggest limiting things that we understand right now for kelp to grow, especially in the summertime. So the growth season is when you plant all the way into the spring. About right now, when the sunlight's starting to really come back, that's when kelp are growing the most, and they can grow quite a bit every week. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears, and like I said, I'm not going to let you get away with talking about some oceanography and science of the sound. These are some data from the 70s all the way up to 2016 that Rob Campbell from your friendly neighborhood oceanographer from the Science Center here made. So this is looking at temperature and salinity on our side of the sound. So it's not specific to any one bay, it's just an overall average of the eastern portion of Prince William Sound. So you can see with the temperature heat map, you've got really cold water, this is all in Celsius, and you've got nice and warm water all the way up to 14 degrees. And kelp, for the most part, like temperatures around between 4 and 12 degrees Celsius. So there's some questions about, does it get too warm in the summertime? If we have a marine heat wave, how is that going to affect kelp? And those are a lot of questions that we don't know right now. But if you look at the growing season, which is basically October when you're planting or the end of September all the way to April or early May, you have nice uniform water here and especially over here with salinity. So what's going on right now is we have this beautiful sunny day, the snow is melting, all of that snow is fresh water. That fresh water is going into the ocean, and fresh water is much less dense than salt water, so it tends to float at the surface. And unfortunately, it's floating kind of at the same level as where we're having our kelp farms. So as we get these beautiful sunny days, the water heats up. It creates this really interesting structure right here. And every time you see this random blob near the surface of the ocean, I want you in your mind to think of it's a cap. It is keeping everything below the surface from reaching or everything that's at depth from reaching the surface of the water. And that's going to be important when we talk about nitrogen. So in the summertime, we have this layer of really warm water and this layer of fresh water in the sound. Okay, so keep that in mind. And so now we're going to talk. We're going to talk about what's going on with nitrogen, and we're specifically going to use Simpson Bay. We've got quite a bit of data from the Gulf Watch Alaska program that Rob Campbell's been running for the past over 10 years now. So we have some data from 2013 to about 2021. So in Simpson Bay, there's 2 stations, one at the mouth and one at the head right here, right next to Noble Ocean Farms and near the Simpson Bay Oyster Company, that have been collecting biological oceanography data every other month or so, about 6 to 8 times a year for the past 12 years or so. So this was supposed to pop up later. I guess my animation doesn't work. But this is a very similar graph as to what I just showed you with salinity and temperature of how much nitrogen is in the water and at what time and at what depth. So this one is for the head of Simpson Bay, which is right here. And then we have another one for the mouth of Simpson Bay. And you can see a very similar thing going on as what we saw with temperature and salinity. We have these caps of nutrients in the summertime. So during the prime growing season, especially in the spring, that yellow is a lot of nitrogen, and that is prime growing time, and it makes kelp very, very happy. This is gonna come into my research with our farm because we're leaving it in throughout the year. But there's not as much nitrogen at the surface where the farms are gonna be located during the summertime. So the question is, can kelp even grow in the summertime? That's one of the things that I'm focusing on right now. Okay? So there's a lot of nitrogen, a lot of fertilizers in the sound to grow kelp, and it's basically everywhere. The bigger thing that you need to worry about, and we'll touch on this in just a second, is salinity and some other biological factors. Okay, so just to review what a farm structure looks like, this is the catenary array. I think we've already seen this before earlier today. Some fun with the mouse. Yeah, so the size of the football field, depending on what you're using, and it can grow around 20,000 feet of seed line, so it takes up about 1.3 acres. In just this specific example, they're all different. It all depends on your site and what you want to do. But yeah, so keep in mind, anchors, one of the most expensive parts of the kelp farm process is purchasing anchors. If you're in deep water, you're going to have a really robust anchoring system that might be a bit more expensive if you're in shallower water. Okay. This is an example of what the kelp farm looks like at the surface. This is from Kodiak. And then if you are privileged enough, like Campson sometimes is, you get to go diving. This is what a kelp farm looks like underwater. Cool. I don't think that sugar kelp is doing very well. Yeah, so it's pretty washed out. Like you can see some of the whiteness. That means it's not getting enough nutrients to grow. Okay, so just some logistical considerations in the context of your infrastructure for your farm is farm access, seed access, and icing in the wintertime, depth, wave exposure, bottom type, social conflicts. So farm access. When you're siting out your farm, think about what's going on with the tide, how much water is coming in and out with the tide, how deep is it at high tide versus low tide. There are some spots that are very well covered at high tide in our area and not so much at low tide. Seed access. So going back to that 30-50 rule, you have about 50 kilometers that you can find your seed in, or 31 miles. And I set up my example from our farm. So these are points, these are the farthest points that we can drive our boat to look for seed. So basically those endpoints and everywhere in between the farm, we can find seed at. And luckily enough for us, that covers basically everything from bulk kelp to sugar kelp to ribbon kelp. Okay? Icing in wintertime. You know, we have some mild winters. It could be, again, a marine heat wave year where there's not a lot of snow, we don't get a lot of ice. Or it could be a year where we get a lot of ice and a lot of ice coverage up in the heads of those bays. So if you have a site in mind, keep going back and checking it throughout the year and throughout the wintertime to see what the conditions are. Depth, kelp, some of these are just by the book numbers that I found. Our site is very different, which I'll talk about because we're in much deeper water. But so far, a lot of the sites are between about 15 to 40 feet at mean low water. Keep in mind for wave exposure, are you setting yourself up for disaster by putting your farm right where those westerlies are going to come take it away during a nice sunny day, or the easterlies and nor'easterlies that just rip right through Salmo Point? Right? Bottom type is also very important, especially when you're thinking about your anchoring systems. Muddy bottoms are really great for those danforths. Rocky bottoms, you'll have to figure out some different type of anchoring system. And finally, for the logistical considerations, social conflicts. I'm not going to get too far into those. Zeke Brown was nice enough to come and talk to us about commercial farming or commercial fishing conflicts with farms, so I'll let him talk about those. Check in with your local native group. They may have some advice or considerations when you're siting in your farm. And just talk to people, see what they think. So the next one are the biological considerations. So from the point of view of kelp and what makes kelp happy. So the first thing is just check out if there's any kelp growing nearby where you're thinking about putting your farm. you're putting your farm kind of near a site where you look on shore and there's tons of kelp growing, tons of the kelp that you want to grow, that's probably a good indication that kelp's going to grow there. Check out what the currents are doing, especially during the mid-low water times. We did a current, I don't want to call it a steady because we just threw some buoys out in the water and then let them go for a half hour and figured out right away. But something as simple as that told us quite a bit about the currents, and we did it at slack tide, so we knew what the minimum currents were at our spot. Also lights, so day length, make sure that you're not putting it right next to one of the fjords that is always in the shade. That's not going to help you kelp. Also turbidity. You know, the Root River out here pumps out so much sediment. Tamsin and I have been talking about this and how much turbidity affects things like sugar kelp that seems to like growing in the mud. So there's still quite a few questions about that, but the textbook advice for turbidity is to make sure you have about 3 to 6.5 feet of visibility, especially during the growing season on those sunny days. Temperature affects everything. I just wanted to throw that out there. If you guys have any questions about the oceanography, I would highly recommend you talk to Rob Campbell. You're also more than welcome to talk to me about it. I'm not as knowledgeable as he is, but I'm going to throw him under the bus for this. Salinity is a big factor for specifically icing in the wintertime, and then also species. There's still a lot of work. I think the theme of this workshop is needs more data, but you can say that about everything. But so our understanding right now, you need to make sure that you have an area that has salinities that are good for your kelp. So going back to, is the kelp growing nearby? Your salinity is probably good. If you want to grow stuff like bull kelp, it's my understanding that that needs higher salinities and higher current flow. So just keep in mind what your kelp wants. Nutrients. We don't really have to worry too much about that besides in the summertime, because nutrients are very seasonal, like I showed you, but there's a lot of nitrogen in our area. We have a pretty cool spot for that kind of thing. And go out to your farm and measure. If you have any questions about what equipment to use to measure, I'd be more than happy to talk to you guys later. We can, you know, work on getting these Secchi discs or refractometers or anything like that, but a lot of the work to measure is very, very simple. It doesn't take too much equipment. And don't just go out and measure once. Go out in the fall, the winter, especially after big storm events. Go out and see what that site might look like. Also, when you're measuring things, don't just measure the surface. What's going on the surface can be very, very different from what's going on a few feet below. All right, and finally, critical habitat and sensitive areas. So these are the kind of the biotic factors that don't have anything to do with kelp, just what's going on in our area. So as the permitters talked about a little bit, they are keeping an eye out for marine mammals. Seal haulouts are a big one. So this map is from that AU's Mariculture portal, and I use the layer that shows where all of the important and documented seal haulouts are for our areas. So the blue haulouts are the very key important haulouts where they're pupping and come back every year and are really important for their life cycle. The yellows aren't key haulouts. Sometimes there's nobody there hanging out. Sometimes it's just seasonal. You also need to keep so for seal haulouts, they want you to keep at least 1/4 mile away. For the seabird rookeries, we have a couple, most of them are in Boswell Bay. I know there's a kittiwake rookery out there. That would be a great question to talk to people from the Science Center, especially Ann Schaefer, who's our local ornithologist. The Anadromous Waters Catalog is a really important aspect of citing in your farm site. So the Anadromous Waters Catalog is a list of all of the waters and streams in Prince William Sound across all of Alaska that have documented salmon and or salmon spawning happening. So these are the critical areas for salmon to complete their life cycle, make more little baby salmon. So you want to make sure that your farm site is at least 300 feet away or more from those salmon spawning streams. And that information can also be found on this portal. The color was purple, so I don't know how well you can see it on there, but those streams are ID'd. And if you have any questions about that, the Copper River Watershed Project is a great resource to discuss that. And then herring spawning habitat, I didn't put that map up because for our side of the sound it's everywhere. If your kelp gets spawned on, I know there's still quite a few questions about what you can use that kelp for, how long do you have to leave your kelp in the water, and all that kind of stuff. So keep in mind that that is a risk, and you are on our side of the sound. Last year, there was a big spawning event in Cedar Bay, which is great for the herring. Like, we need more herring in the sound. But I think that everybody over at Windy Bay might have been like a little worried about whether or not they were going to make it over to their farm site. Luckily, they didn't. How are we doing through time? Good. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to go over the example of all of those concepts and how we use them to cite our location. So our farm gear is very different from the catenary rates that everybody's using in the kind of the two-dimensional growing of kelp that everybody's using so far. So we're growing kelp vertically down to 30 feet below the surface. So we needed a deeper spot with a bit more current to test the system. We're working with ocean rainforests. But this is one of the maps that I had to submit to, I think this was an Army Corps map. So you can see here that we are almost a third of a mile away from a close anadromous waters catalog stream right here. This is our lease area, the red bounding lines, and then this is the system that we're using within. Our anchors are nice and tight within the bounding line. The tide is going this way. It kind of does weird things over here that we're learning quite a bit about. You can see with these lines, we have the kelp beds and eelgrass beds from shore zone mapped along that map, so we know exactly where everything is according to shore zone. Our bottom type is rocky. I'll talk about why that is later in the afternoon. Surface current, our little mini test showed us that at the very least during slack tide, it's about half to 0.6 knots. And our depth is about 75 to 130 feet. And like I said, I'll talk about why we decided to do it so deep. Okay. I have a few resources here. All of the slides are going to get set out at some point.
Yeah, and these links will also be in the document that I sent you that just has things to clear.
Yeah, so these are just some resources and tools that we've already talked about and gone over. If you guys want to pull out your phones, so this is the ADF&G lease map website. So I put a little IQR code if anybody wants to take a picture, so you can go right there. And again, these will be back up later. The other great tool is that AU's portal, the mariculture map. There's another QR code that'll be on the PDF you guys get. And yeah, does anybody have any questions? And of course, you can ask me questions while you're eating too.